In 1996, an invention came into the world that for many people caused such a disruption, it was almost like the tilt of the earth shifted just a little bit. In 1996, MapQuest was introduced to the world. And for the first time in human history, the directionally challenged were given a turn-by-turn explanation for how to get from where they are to where they want to go. Previously, we had to rely on things like, hey, go down past the second red house with the 3 yard cars and then turn left. And when you get to the end of the road, like that kind of instruction. Or maybe a map that you could hold out. And, all of us who had to learn how to use that had to learn how to invert your brain when we're driving south. I'm looking at this map. A right is a left is a right. But then I just turned and now up is down. Wait, right, left, what? This was, for the directionally challenged, such a great thing. And so you could print out, and sometimes it would even be multiple pages of a printout. And I know some of you right now are like, what are you even talking about right now? I'm old, I know it, I know it. But I want you to look around for a minute because there's a whole group of people that printed out those directions. Yeah. And you can call us dinosaurs. We were survivors. We were just trying to get through one era to the next. We've been living in worlds that are half analog and half digital for all of our life. We're just trying to survive in this reality. But one of the things that happened that was always really, really helpful, because you're thumbing through this paper and you're driving and you're looking down, you're driving and you're looking down, is it was so wonderful when you got to the last instruction, to the last step. Because you could kind of just set it down. And you had one last thing to look for, and then you were going to arrive at your destination. Guys, we are in this series that we have called Uncharted, we are at the last step. And we are at Abraham, who's been the subject of this story for most of what we've been doing. We are at his last step, literally at his last chapters in life. His last verses, the last part of his narrative. And over the last several weeks, we've been watching and exploring along with him these uncharted places of faith. And Abraham had no map. He had no GPS, no Waze, no nothing to navigate this journey. He didn't have a Bible. He didn't have the law. He didn't have the prophets. He didn't have a mentor. He didn't have anybody who could take him down the road with him. He just had a God who said, go. And so he went. A God who said, trust. And so he believed. A God who said, give. And so he surrendered. At every turn, the terrain was uncharted. But God had given him a promise. And Abraham chose to believe that promise and put his faith in the one who made the promise. And we said from the beginning of the series that this whole journey through Abraham's life in this series called Uncharted basically could be summed up in this teaching point. That God often leads his people to uncharted places so that their faith and not their familiarity becomes their anchor. We've seen in Abraham's life, we've been challenged to look in our life how to do the same, to allow our faith and not what's comfortable or familiar to be our anchor point in life. And as we come to those last verses of Abraham's life, we come to realize that this is really the ultimate trust that Abraham had in God. And that God called him to trust him to the very, very end. This is a place that we all find ourselves in at some point. There is a final chapter for every person, and no one can rehearse it. No one can lean into the instruction of a mentor to model it. No roadmap can diagram it. No return ticket is given back from it. 10 out of 10 people experience it. It's the last chapter and the last verses. We said in week 1 that Abraham left everything to follow and to trust God. And I think one of the things that's forgotten in his story is that he actually did it twice. He did it at the beginning of the journey, but he also did it at the end. Because when he left this earth, he left everything. He left it all. He left it all behind. Genesis chapter 25, verse 7. says that Abraham lived 175 years. And then he breathed his last, and he died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, gathered to his people. A man who once had stepped into the unknown had now stepped into eternity. And once he had stepped into the uncharted, very uncertain, this time he stepped into the unknown, very certain. There's a big difference between uncharted and uncertain. One can mean anxiety, and one can mean confusion, and one can mean despair, and another can mean adventure. And we're going to see how this plays out, and we're going to see where this goes. And Abraham, in his last breath, didn't die clinging. He didn't die afraid. He didn't die grasping from unfinished business. He died believing. Scripture says that he died gathered to his people. This is a phrase that's rich with hope and continuity, life beyond the grave. When he died certain that God was not finished, certain that this promise that had been spoken to him was not only for this lifetime, certain that beyond his last breath on this earth was the presence of the God who called him. Over the course of these 5 weeks, we've been looking not only at Genesis, but we've been looking also at places in the Bible where his story is rephrased or connected to. Many connections are to Jesus. Many connections are to New Testament key verses. One of the places we're going to go today is going to do that very thing. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11 for the rest of the morning. The writer of Hebrews apparently was convinced that there needed to be a little more said on the subject of Abraham and his faith and his life. There was a bit of a application, a bit of a summarization that needed to happen that hadn't yet been done in all the pages of Scripture. And as you read it, it reads like the eulogy at Abraham's funeral, like someone got up who knew him, saw him, and wanted to make sure everybody who saw his life understood it within these particular realities. So the writer starts out in verse 8 and says this about Abraham's story. That by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and he went, even though he didn't know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in the foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him in the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder was God. By faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was unable to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All of these people were still living by faith when they died. They didn't receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. But instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. I've always appreciated that summary of Abraham's life in Hebrews 11. And I don't think there's been a time that I've read it that verse 16 hasn't stopped me in my tracks, where it says, therefore, God was not ashamed to be called their God. That there was something demonstrated in Abraham and in Sarah and in several others listed in that chapter, but that there was something demonstrated in their faith that was so exemplary. It must be stated that God noticed it, that God approved it, that God was proud of it, that God associated with it, that God said, I want others to do the very same thing as they lived their life of faith. And so I want to end this morning with the time that I have, 3 takeaways, 3 lessons, 3 inspirations that come from Abraham's totality of his life and faith, and specifically his willingness into his last days and his last breath to trust that same God to carry him to the next life that's beyond. 3 observations that I think, as I place them into my life, as you place them into your life, will call you into a fuller experience in this uncharted space that God wants to do his great work in your life. I think these are the very things that Abraham would say to us if he had the opportunity to stand on this stage and with everything that's within him and everything in his life experience to share these things. I think the first thing he would say is, in this world that you live in, live like a pilgrim and not a settler. This world is not all there is. Even though it's all we know, even though it's all that we have experienced, it is not all there is. Maybe the most inspiring thing about Abraham and his journey of faith is that he never quite fully saw it come together in his lifetime. He never quite saw it fully the way he probably imagined he would by the end of his days. I mean, he was promised land, but he lived in a tent. He was promised a bunch of descendants, but he only owned a burial plot. He was promised a blessing, yet he was still waiting for the fullness that would totally come. That means he understood something that a lot of us struggle to grasp, and that's that this world was never the destination. It was simply the road to the destination. Verse 9 said that Abraham did his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. And it says that he lived in tents. And so you immediately, in our context, we start thinking about camping. That's the only time we are in tents, is if we were camping. And I think when it comes to camping, there are distinctly 3 categories that most people fall into. I think category number 1 is when I say the word camping, there's something inside of you that gets excited. There's something inside, because we're talking like wilderness camping, right? Like in a tent, no frills, just hard life, but there's something awesome about it. There's something like frontier about it. There's something like just courageous about it. There's something manly about it. There's just some. How many of you fall into category 1 and camping wilderness style in a tent is like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about? There's a few of you. I'm looking around, mostly beards are holding their hand, but there's a few ladies that are tougher than nails. They're tougher than a lot of guys in this room. Okay, that's category 1. Category 2, the word camping is not the right word if we replace the first letter with 2 different letters, a G and an L, and we move from camping to glamping, and we were talking in an RV with a toilet, with something that could shelter us a little bit. I'm seeing like heads nodding right now. Like there's this other experience where we could have a camp stove, and we could have, maybe with propane connected to it, and we could have a shower, and we could have some modern convenience. How many of you would go, I can camp as long as we're in category 2, more in the glamping stage? Yeah, okay. Now, there is also a third category. And in the third category, your idea of roughing it is reusing your towel at the hotel a second day. How many of you are in category number 3? Be proud if that's who you are. That's fine. That's fine. Listen, I think it's also notable that we move through these phases, okay? And we even experiment sometimes with different phases just to try to test again. Do I like that? No, I don't. I'm not going to. And so I've noticed as I've gotten older, I'm kind of moving towards 3. Like there was an era where we were somewhere closer to 2. Maybe I'd like to think 1, but it was probably 2. But that era's done. And I don't really have interest in going back to that. Because 3 just sounds like, wait, I'm off work? I'm away from everything? I'm paying for this? No, let's relax. Let's enjoy. I'm kind of squarely moving to 3. But let's imagine for grins that we are camping and we're out together, and you're going with my family, and we're hanging out. We're setting up our tent, and you're setting up yours. And then there's another group of people that are camping with us. And you notice that as they start setting up, they've got this just gigantic tent. Like, there's always that family that has like that house tent that you can stand up in and you can really get after it. So they're doing that. And you're like, whoa, what a tent. Impressive. Okay, well, you do you. But then you notice also that as soon as they get the tent up, they've actually brought some people with her, and they're contractors. And these contractors start loading in like studs. And is that a base cabinet? Are you bringing in cabinets? Are you? And is somebody really, is that a countertop? Like, are you setting? And you start realizing that they are actually constructing inside this tent a house, like with permanent stuff. Like, and you're like, why would you do that? Why, like, what are you doing? And that's the right question to ask, because you're thinking, bro, we're leaving Tuesday. Like, what are you even doing? What are you even possibly doing? And I think the question is the right one. But in honesty, that's how a lot of us are living our life. We've built our entire identity on a career that we will one day retire from. Or we pour all of our resources into things that will ultimately rust. Or we put our faith or our trust, build our confidence on a body that is aging and wearing out. Abraham lived differently. And he held the things of the earth differently because he knew that this wasn't the ultimate. He had money, he had influence, he could have built cities. He chose to live in a tent. Because he knew his permanent address wasn't here. And he refused to treat a temporary assignment like it was his permanent address. He lived in tents for decades in the very land that God promised him, because he made an intentional commitment to not anchor his heart into the soil that would one day hold his bones. He made a point that soil that would hold his bones would not be the same soil that would anchor his life and his heart and his perspective for everything that he was going to do. He saw something beyond. He looked beyond the horizon. You have to be able to see beyond the horizon. I think that's the second takeaway here. Abraham couldn't just see to the horizon, which is usually where our view stops. He saw beyond it. He saw beyond the promised land. He was living in the promised land that he said was going to be his, God did. But he was seeing beyond it to a land not built by human hands, not vulnerable to decay, not shaken by invasion. Verse 10 said that he was looking to the city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. And if you want to know what the secret to holding on to faith from beginning to the end, there it is. Learning to see beyond the horizon. Because if all your eyes can see are what you experience in this world, when you go through difficulty or pain or frustration, then you will be led to a place of despair in your faith. But if you can see beyond the horizon, then your struggles and how you endure hardship will change. When you can see beyond the horizon, it'll change how you navigate a delay in life. When you can see beyond the horizon, it'll change how tightly you hold on to outcomes. Because you realize that whatever I think this moment is, it is a blip on the eternal radar of my existence, and ultimately may not change much at all. If this world is ultimate, if what we see is ultimate, suffering is devastating. But if eternity is ultimate, suffering becomes refining. Delays become refining. Tests become refining. Uncharted faith means in those moments holding on to faith, but even to the very, very end. Never stopping to ask questions of yourself and of your faith like this. Am I living more like a settler than a pilgrim in this very temporary place that I find myself in? Am I building a monument to myself rather than an altar of God? Am I clinging to what fades rather than longing for what lasts? See, I don't want to give this indication that uncharted faith is reckless wandering, because that's not what it is. It's steady hope that's anchored in eternity, but guiding everyday decisions, walking through this world with your eyes fixed on the next one, and making a commitment, here's the third one, to trust God all the way home. Abraham trusted God all the way home, to his last breath. You know, when you go on a trip with the family, I don't know about your family, in the back of my car, as we go on car rides, there's one question. It is kind of the universal question that will come up multiple times on the journey from the back seat, from the passengers. And that question on the ride is, are we there yet? You guys are in the same cars as us. Are we there yet? And, you know, over the years, sometimes these are comically asked from very, very young children who maybe are 45 minutes into a 12-hour drive to Florida. Are we there yet? No, we are not there yet. Bless your heart. Other times, that question is asked from a teenage kid who's woken up from their fourth nap. Meanwhile, dad is like toothpick to hold the eyes open, fourth Monster, third coffee, driving through the night. And the question comes up, are we there yet? It's like, I will kill you if you ask me that question again. We will get there when we get there, right? I don't know if in our prayer life or our thought life that we verbalize it with those words. But I think spiritually speaking, we are constantly asking the question, are we there yet? Are we there yet? I've even found myself asking the question, like, God, can I just get to a place where I stop having to have so much faith? Like, is there a graduation ceremony of sorts? Is there a moment where I've gotten through it enough and you've tested enough and you've challenged enough and You've taken me through the fire enough that we can chill for a bit and it won't require so much faith every day to do what I do. Are we there yet? As you've poured the blessings on my life, which he's done, he's probably done for you too, can they be enough to where I get to a place of satisfaction where I go, are we there? I think we are there yet. And I don't know if you found what I've found, but in this life, I never get there. And I've not been able to find a place in this spiritual journey that I'm on where I've ever been able to say, I think we're done, and I think I've made it, and I think we're there. I've had multiple times where I thought we were getting close only to realize, oh, there's a whole lot more to learn. There's a whole lot more to stretch. There's a whole lot more to experience. Abraham, when he was first told by God that I'm going to make you into a great nation, and your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as countless as the sands on the seashore. You're going to live in a new land. Leave this land to go to that land. Abraham is human like us. I have to believe that there was a chance, that there was a place in his heart and in his mind that when he got to the land, when he got the kid, that he said, we made it. We're there. We're there. And I imagine he experienced a little bit of frustration when he got to there and realized, I'm not there. We talked about this with the story of Isaac and how the blessing had the potential to take God's place. The very thing that God gave him had the chance to take the place of God in his relationship. God needed to test him to see where his faith and his allegiance really lied. I think overlooked in the moment where God made his covenant with Abraham, God told Abraham these words, Abraham, I am your shield and I am your great reward. And I think it took him a little while to realize that that was what a rival truly is seeing God as the great reward and not the things that God can do for you. Not the things that God can give you, not the things that he can provide for you. Abraham's faith matured over time. Maybe in his early years, he was asking God, what can you give me? But by the end, he knew that God himself was the reward. The gift was never the land. It was never the child. The gift was God. And friends, when you realize that God, is the reward, death is not a loss. Death is not the end. Death becomes the arrival, the last step to the destination for all of eternity. Faith begins with trusting God for a future that is primarily right now tied on this earth, but it matures by trusting Him even into eternity. And for those who walk with God, for those who have trusted His Son, Jesus, death is not the edge of the map, it's the doorway to the city. It's the doorway to the city whose architect and building is God. One of the great things about life is that we don't have to wander the way some of us do, because there is a way. There is a path. There is an opportunity to walk through a door out of this life and into the next. And unlike Google Maps, where it gives you a number of different ways and options for how you can make it, there's one way. And I know the world is sometimes chafed by that we say there's one way, but wouldn't you like to know with certainty that there is a way? And isn't there great comfort in knowing when you have a map provided to you that there is a path to get you to the intended destination? That's what we have in Jesus. You see, this gift or this promise that was spoken to Abraham 2,000 years later becomes realized in Jesus. The New Testament begins with, in Matthew 1, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Matthew was connecting the dots that promise that God spoke to Abraham came to fulfillment in him. That over 2,000 years, that family line continued through centuries, through exiles, through prophets, through kings, until one night in Bethlehem, when the promise took on flesh and that better country stepped into this country. And tents gave way to the incarnation, and longing found its hope in the resurrection. Abraham was looking forward to his city. Revelation 22 says that city is coming, and there are no more tears there. There is no more pain. There is no more death. There is no more uncharted sorrow. Because Jesus has confirmed it through his death, burial, and resurrection. Jesus one time was asked about the resurrection of the dead. And he says in Matthew 22, that about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? That I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. Abraham, I told you at the beginning of this, breathed his last at age 175, but Jesus was here to say, guys, if you think Abraham is gone, you're wrong. He's alive. That the God that Abraham believed in, the God that Abraham served, is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And that he didn't pass away 2,000 years ago only to be vanquished for all of eternity. He is very much alive, in fact, more alive than he's ever been. The resurrection became, for Jesus, the validation of Abraham's final act of faith, which was dying in faith. That God had something more for him after this, that this wasn't the end. And though we've called this series Uncharted, something that you've got to understand is that just because Abraham didn't know where this thing was going, that doesn't mean God didn't. There's nothing uncharted for God. There's no part of life, there's no part of your existence or human existence, the galaxy's existence, none of it is uncharted for God. So your uncertainty right now that you might be feeling is not his confusion. Your delay is not his absence. Your test is not his oversight. And the terrain that you might be experiencing right now that is very rough and rocky and difficult is no surprise to him. No surprise to him. It's thoroughly known, and he's already there waiting for you in that chapter when you get there, because he's promised to walk you through it. Before you arrive at the next chapter, God's there waiting for you, and he's even made a way that the final chapter that you experience on this life will usher you in to the ultimate chapter, beyond your wildest imagination. So the question is really never, where is this going? Which is a question that we ask God when we're in it. Where is this thing going? The question is, will we trust God further than we can see a moment right now? A God who sees further than we can. Some of you are standing at the edge of something right now. Maybe a decision, a calling, a hard obedience, a surrender that you've been resisting. You don't have all the details. You don't know how it would play out. You haven't seen the provision yet. Welcome to the uncharted, where faith is formed. Some of you are wrestling with mortality. You're seeing life through the lens of a limited amount of time. The older you get, the more you start to see this to be a reality that confronts you. The harder you suffer, the more physical pain and struggle, sickness, disease you wrestle with, the more real this becomes. Know that you have a God who's made a way for you, not only to be sustained in this life with his presence, but to be redeemed forever. Some of you are wrestling with an initial surrender to Jesus as Lord of your life. The evidence is there. The knowledge is there. But the will puts up a heck of a fight. Maybe today is your moment to surrender. You know, this journey that Abraham's been on, that we've been gleaning so much from, was really all tied to 8 interactions that Abraham had over a 100-year period of time. All of this story, and all of this legacy, and all of these movements were all connected to about 8 interactions that he had with God. 8 times in 175 years where he knew clearly God had something for him. I think that highlights a couple things for you and I. One, there is power in a singular moment, and some of you are experiencing it right now. There are singular moments in life, and you don't need a million of them. Sometimes it just takes a couple to propel you to a place where you know unmistakably God was calling and leading on that day. And I will never forget it. If this is one of those days and you feel God stirring in your heart, this is what it feels like when he's calling you into the uncharted. Respond to what he's calling you to. I want to also say this, because I think I'd be remiss if I did. Abraham operated without the word of God. You don't. You don't. And so you don't have to go 8 times in your whole life hearing from God. You could go 8 times in an hour hearing from God. You could have 8 interactions every hour with God by opening up his word. God forbid you would not have 8 in a week, or 8 in a month, or 8 in a year. He would kill, Abraham would, for something like this. To not have to wander so much, to not have to feel so lost, but to be able to have God's will and his word placed into his life. Consume this book, because it is a light into your path, a lamp into your feet. It will illuminate the direction forward for you in a way that will be helpful and beneficial to you. But ultimately, guys, it comes to a point of full surrender to a God who has charted a future grander than we could ever imagine, with more details than we've ever even been able to consider. So will you, in your moment, place your faith in him? I'd ask you to stand, if you would, as we get ready to worship. And if there is a decision on your heart, first time or otherwise, that you'd like to make, I pray that you would respond. If you'd like to talk to somebody personally during this worship time, I'll be standing over by the exit to your left. I'd love to meet with you and pray with you. For everybody, let's just go to the Lord in this moment and ask him to give us the courage to follow him wherever he calls.